Hey everyone, it's Blaze from Funbox here, and we're going to continue on from the previous video of random weapon stat generation, as well as random number of drops. Like I said, we are going to be just working with one item. Something I forgot to mention before. It's a new format. I gotta remind myself of that. It doesn't just apply to one type of item. You can actually apply this to anything. What's important is that you understand the underlying code and you understand how it works. So if there's any point in time that you don't understand, ask a question. I just want to tell you that now. Just ask a question, because at least then I'll be able to gauge how effective my explanations are, but also answer the question that you have. That's probably the most important thing that you want when asking a question. All right. So in this one, we're going to continue on. For this part of the tutorial, we're actually done with this key press enter, so we don't need that. We are going to fill in these enums. We're going to fill in the sword stats with at least one or maybe two types of sword. And in the bottom here, we're going to fill in some code for the sword itself, because if you remember from the game, the test that we had before, it's animating, and I mean, it spawns the right number of swords, but it's animating and it doesn't really show us any information. So we're going to work on that. But first things first, let's fill in these enums. Like I said before, these enums are variables that have constants assigned to them. All right, enough of that. Let's go item stat, and we are going to have attack. And then we're going to have another one for defense. You don't have to have these variables, not variables. You don't have to have these constants in your version. It's whatever you feel is appropriate to your project. Just adapt it. Of course, if you're following on one-to-one as a reference guide, then by all means, do what I'm doing. But once you start implementing it into your own project, it can be whatever you want. If you're working on, say, I don't know, an item pool like potions and things like that, then you'd obviously have to have the appropriate constants for those. But because the scope of this mini project is so small, scale it appropriately is the point. Just scale it appropriately. All right, these next two items here. So the first four, name, attack, defense, and speed, that's pretty self-explanatory. Whoa, it's getting really windy. Hang on, let me close the window. These next two items, the sprite and the next one, the sub image, these two relate directly to the sprite that we have. So if you remember from the setup phase or the setup video, we created one sprite with 4 images. Now imagine if you had, I don't know, say shields, right? And that also had different sub images, and each sub image has its own, I don't know, stats associated with it. That's where these two variables come in, sprite and sub image. Very simple. We are not going to assign numbers to these because, I mean, they default to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you were to assign a stat, this is possible. Doing something like this, that works. That is allowed, but we don't want that in our case. Oops, we don't want that in our case. All right, for the stat tables, I'm thinking we should have min attack, just so that we have some sort of randomization. And then max attack, obviously. I mean, we don't want to have some super overpowered weapon, like for level 1s or anything like that. We're gonna have defense, and then we're gonna have speed. Now, there's a reason why I have separated min and max attack and defense and speed are the way they are. I just want to make a point when we start writing the stat generation script. Again, we will need a sprite, and we will need a sub image. All right, that's literally it. That's all that we have to do for C generator. Let me close this up. I want to show you guys something. If you didn't know how to do this before, if you right-click a script or middle click script, depending on how it's mapped, it will actually come up and it will open in the window next to wherever you clicked it from. This is just in a GML version for GameMaker Studio 2. I'm not sure if this functionality is in the free version, but yeah, it's there if you're curious. Okay, so for sword stats, we need to actually put in that what is it? That 2D array. Eesh, I forgot. We're going to put in that 2D array, and we're going to follow along with these items here. So it's going to look something like this. Stat. And we're going to start from 0. Stat and stat table dot name. And let's call the first one an iron sword. Simple as that. The next one, a faster way to type this is to actually have 0, and then you can just write the constant name, so min attack, and it will, there. It won't auto fill in for you, but you can write it there. And then stat. Okay, so I fast forwarded that section here there because we don't need it. Just a bunch of filler really. So let's go over that real quick. We have a name, we have a min attack, max attack, defense, and speed, and I've assigned variables to those directly. The next thing that we're going to do is the sprite and sub image. Really, it doesn't really matter, but I mean, for readability's sake, I believe that it's good practice to have that. Oh, not item stat, we want stat table. Right, that's the other thing that you need to be careful of, is when you're referring to an enum that you refer the correct enum. Just double check that at all times, that you have the right one. The last one is the sub image. Like I said, if you have one sprite that has, or if you have a certain item in your game and it has multiple variations in air quotations of it, then there's really no reason to have a separate sprite for them all together. So if you can imagine, let's say in our case, a sword here, we have a sword, it's the same, it's basically the same shape, the same object in one sprite. I mean, you can have different sized swords and with different effects and things like that. But for the sake of cleanliness in your project, I think it's much easier if you just have them as separate sub images, especially if they're going to just be, I don't know, if you're just going to show them as part of a drop or something like that. It's much easier to have a bunch of icons in your game grouped together in a single sprite and to have separate sprites with a whole bunch of different them. And if they're just the one sub image, it just gets way too tedious. The last one is the stat table, and let me just write sub image. Stat table sub image equals 0. All right, we now have one sword done. All right, so I'm going to fast forward here, but basically feel free to make as many different types of swords as you want, or different types of items that you want. And I'm just going to cut from here to the next bit. All right, so I've basically filled it all in there. We have an iron sword, a steel sword, obsidian sword, and magic sword. Now, pay attention to these numbers here. I'm just going to change this one to 3 because I actually forgot to do that. But these all correspond to different parts of the image, right? It makes sense to do that. 2, and this should be 3 there. All right, so here we have this 0 here, or rather how we refer to these numbers will become clear later on in this video. Hopefully much clearer than how I have it in my head in terms of explanations. But here we have 4 different types of swords. This is done. The only thing we're missing now is actually a return statement. Let me scroll down so that you guys can see. We're going to return stat. That's simple. That really is just that simple. These stats will get fed into sort pool, and this sort pool will basically be the 2D array for all of these different types of swords. Right, that's basically all it is. Okay, now the next part is going to be a little bit more challenging. Hopefully you guys can keep up. If you are falling behind, if you feel you're falling behind or you don't understand anything, let me know. And if you do have a question, of course, ask away. The next thing that we're going to do is actually start creating these items. All right, the first thing that we're going to do for our sword object is we're going to have our create event. And the item, we are going to, for now, just for now, we're going to leave it at 0. This item number is basically corresponding to the stats that we have here, right? So whatever number comes up in the stat here, down here, and the item number, that will be one of these stat numbers, right? So just keep that in mind. All right, the next thing that we're going to need is the actual stats for this particular item. So stats equals, and we are going to reference the stat generator. Boom. All right, let's open this up and let's fill in some code. Our stat generator requires 2 arguments. The first one will be the type of item, the number here. So I guess the class, or let's just call it item. This is going to be easier that way. All right, so number item, and we are going to assign it argument 0. The next one that we'll need is the item type, right? Item type, and we are going to assign that argument 1. The last one will be var array, and this array will also be returned. Whoops, return array. All right, now for some reason my local variables are not being highlighted in yellow. Not sure why, and I'm not sure why my variables are highlighting blue, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Something weird. But in any case, what we are going to do is we're going to fill in the blanks here with basically our calculation code. So let's go array, and we are going to fill this in. All right, this is where we're going to be doing a bit of dragging around. These array names, or the values, the index values, will be the item stat that we have up here. So you can see that the stat table has name, min and max attack, defense, speed, sprite, and subimage. But the item stat, the actual object, only has the name, the attack, defense, speed, sprite, and subimage. Which means that down here for item stat, right, we're going to have name, attack, not min and max, just regular attack. All right, so let's type that in. Let's start with name. Name, item stat, name. And for this, we are going to reference the item type, which is our sword, the number, whichever one it is, and then we're going to refer to the name of that. So basically, it'll be, hopefully it makes sense, item type, which in this case is our 2D array, item type, and we're going to use an accessor. This allows us to get the value of a specific array function, of a specific array at a specific value that we designate. So, for example, at I11 will basically be stat 1, 1, right? That's basically what it is. But we don't want to be using hard-coded numbers. we want to be using variables. So here we will go with item and then stat table dot name. Let's just leave it at that for now and let's see if that works. However, I just realized we don't have a way to actually show any of that. So let's add a draw event. Draw. All right, for this one, we're going to draw the sprite that we have, of course. Draw self. And we're also going to draw text. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We are going to use stat generator for that. So stat, at item. Remember, we are referencing. We're not assigning, we are referencing. Stat item dot item, item stat dot name. All right. Now, this has come up weird. Number of arguments expected 3 got 1, and that's because we haven't put in the 0 for that x, y, stat. There we go. And I guess for safety's sake, so it doesn't throw an error, we should enclose that in a string function. Now it's got here, variable stat only referenced once. Oh, I wrote stats. Sorry. There we go. There we go. That should be all fixed. All right. The next thing that we're going to need to do is actually we need to fill this in. If we try to run this program now, it will actually give us an error because we don't have any arguments for here and here. So the two arguments that we need is actually item. Let's put that in, item. And the other argument that we need is actually this one here, global sword pool. So let's put that down here as well. Global dot sword pool. All right, let's save that and let's try playing the game or running a test. There you go. It's still animating, but it's come up as iron sword. How do we get the other weapons in the game? Well, we can change this actually. Random, and we have 4 items, but we don't start at 4. Remember, computers start counting from 0. So we need to go from 0 all the way up to 3. Let's do that. Random 3. Let's see what we get. Let's save that out. Let's see what happens when we press enter. There we go. We have obsidian sword, 2 obsidian swords, and a magic sword. Magic sword again, steel sword. There we go. We're getting all different swords now, which is good. Now a little bit of an explanation for irandom3. Irandom3 is basically integer random. There is such thing as just random, but this gives us a number with decimal points. So we don't want that. We just want integer, and it's enough to do that. All right. The next thing that we need to do is actually get it to not show any of those animations. We want it to stay as a single image. So the first thing we need is image speed. We're going to set that to 0. The next thing that we're going to do is sprite index. We're going to set that to stats at, because we are referencing an array here, at item stat dot sprite, and the image index is stats at I believe it's subimage, if I correctly remember. Item stat subimage. There we go. All right, so let's try playing this game again, and hopefully now, whoops, we have an error. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we're not actually done with this yet. Instead of filling in all of this extra code, I'm gonna fast forward again, and then I'll explain it as we go back through it. All right, so these 2 items here is actually what we need to be able to to draw these sprites correctly. We haven't added them in, and so if we tried to play it before, we would actually get that error again. So let's try it now, and let's see what happens. There we go. Now we have a magic sword and we have an iron sword, and it's drawing the correct sprites. Now the text is still a bit off, so let's try and fix that. Let's go from X, go plus, let's go 32. I'm pretty sure that's going to be enough for us. There we go. There we go. We can see now that we have steel swords, we have obsidian swords, magic swords, iron swords. We have all of the swords possibly spawning in, which is great. So it works at a fundamental level. All right, let's leave it here for now. In the next one, we'll fill in the rest of those calculations, and hopefully we can also get some randomized, truly randomized number of items spawning too. All right, guys, see you in the next one. Bye-bye.